Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is Listening Beyond the Soundbites. Eric LaMontagne is joining me tonight as co-host, and we have another show that's talking about Act 46, as we've been doing the last couple of weeks. So joining me today is Carl Parton. Carl, how are you?
Doing well.
Carl is on the Berlin School Board, and, well, actually, you were, and then you left, and you can explain that to folks, and you're back.
I am back on the Berlin School Board, and actually because of Act 46, they had a very difficult time getting potential board members to volunteer, knowing that there was the potential for the board to be disbanded.
Yes, well, we're very, oh my, that's not a good word, disbanded. Yeah. We're very glad you're back, Carl. Thank you, since I live in Berlin.
Amen.
And our other guest is Scott Thompson, who is on the on the U32 board.
Right.
And you represent Calais,
yes.
And both of you are on the Act 46 study committee for Washington Central, correct?
Right. That's right.
Great. So here we are, Act 46. So as we always ask our guests to talk a little bit about themselves to let folks know, and would you like to start, Scott?
Sure. I feel that I'm an Act 46 survivor, as much as I'm anything at this point. Grizzled, battle-weary.
Yeah, exactly.
But still committed to achieving a good outcome for our towns and for our students.
Now, I should ask this a little bit later on, but you're on the U32 board.
Yes.
Is that under this umbrella at all, or the supervisory union will be overseeing U32?
U32 it's already the union high school district for all the 5 towns, for Berlin, Calais, East Montpelier, Middlesex, and Worcester.
Right.
So, in a sense, what will happen under consolidation is that the U32 board will evaporate, and there will be a U32-like board that will do everything, both the high school and the elementary schools.
Oh, wow. Oof. They asked me one time to be on the school board, and I just sort of laughed, only because you really have to do your homework before you show up for the board. The select board, you can kind of fake it a little.
I wonder what select board members would say about that.
No, I say it for years, so they've heard me. Carl, you want to talk a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I've lived in Berlin for close to 20 years now, but I was born and raised in central Vermont, and I joined the Berlin School Board after a 5 or 6 year stint on the Planning Commission because I want to be involved. I want to volunteer for the community and do my part, and certainly with a sophomore in high school at U32 and a 6th grader now at Berlin Elementary School, I wanted to do my best to be sure that Berlin and U32 gave my kids and all the kids of the community the best possible education.
Good for you. And Carl, at the end of this show, if you hear our theme song, Carl wrote it and played on his guitar, and he let me keep it. That was great. I was very excited. So see, you have to look at the last part. One of the slides says music, which is called Soundbites by Carl Parton. How's that? It's a small world.
That's fantastic. Well, let's get this discussion rolling here. So we're concentrating on 5 towns. We're talking about 5 towns tonight that are being affected by this Act 46 consolidation. Could you start us off, Scott? Let us know which towns those are.
Sure. There's Berlin, that Carl represents from being on the Berlin Elementary School Board. There's Calais, which of course has its own elementary school and elementary school board. Both Berlin and Calais and the other towns that I'll get to in a moment also have representatives on the U32 Union High School Board, Middle and High School Board. Don't want to forget those 7th and 8th graders. Calais, Berlin, Calais, there's East Montpelier, Middlesex, and Worcester. Essentially, the 5 towns that form a kind of donut around Montpelier as the donut hole. Although Montpelier was originally a founding member of the Union 32 high school district back in the 60s, but Montpelier pulled out for reasons that are lost in the mists of history. And Berlin stepped in instead. So this is one reason for me why, if anyone says, oh, you can just do anything you want, it doesn't matter how people feel about towns working together, that is very clearly not true, because the one merger that might possibly have made sense, which would have included Montpelier in along with the rest of us, wasn't even really seriously considered. And there's a lot of sort of baggage that dates back 50 years.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
What is the 32 in U32?
I think they just numbered all the union districts, and they happened to, when they just got there at that point. Yeah.
That's cool.
The Marshfield Plainfield district is Union 33, and they came after 32.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh,
Okay.
So we're moving
Okay.
from right to left.
So Montpelier is merging with Randolph?
With Roxbury.
Roxbury. I knew it was an R.
Yes.
So that means that neither one of those schools are going to close, because nobody's going to take that ride. I mean, seriously, that would be a long ride on a bus for
It would be.
kids.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I just found that strange, but it's what it is.
You're not the only one.
Yes, I know, exactly. So did we cover them all? Middlesex?
Yes, and Middlesex and Worcester
Worcester.
as well.
And
So
where is, I shouldn't say this, but where is Rumney?
Rumney is in Middlesex.
Middlesex,
And
okay.
Doty is in Worcester.
Oh, okay, because sometimes when they were listing the towns, they put
Yes.
Doty and Rum in instead of the towns, and I
Right.
was struggling with, do I have these names right? But I did.
Yeah, yeah.
Very strange. So, and just so you know, we did a show with Dave Kelly and Brad Ferlin on Act 46 itself, so I think people who are watching this already have a show that's explained to them about Act 46, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time
That's
tonight
fine,
talking about it,
sure.
because I think we got it.
That's good, because I
Yeah.
might speak
I'm
for
up to
Scott.
here.
It's difficult when we talk about Act 46 for us not to editorialize
Oh,
about
yeah.
really? Yes.
our feelings
No, we'll just
about,
move along
about
here.
the law.
But Act 46 was signed into law in 2015, and the Washington Central Supervisor Union, a committee was formed, and you two are on it. And I read that it was in place 18 months, and then you sent a letter to Secretary Holcomb, who is no longer in the Department of Ed. Could you talk about, either one of you, the work of the committee and what the final conclusion was that you sent to Secretary Holcomb?
Sure.
I'll start and you finish, because
Yeah,
Scott was the lead author of the Alternative Governance Structure paper, but it was a little longer than 18 months, actually.
Oh.
And right after the 2015 law, we had a summer study committee for 3 months, which about 15 to 20 volunteer community members met to discuss and investigate, learn about Act 46, learn what we had to do to prepare for what's called the 706B committee, which is a discussion of the Articles of Agreement. So it was a little longer than the 18 months even that the committee actually came together. It was a group of a few representatives from each school district, each town, and we discussed Articles of Agreement to the best of our ability. After researching, the superintendent's office put together a pretty extensive, what I would call, justification for consolidation. Really, they were, I would say, attempting to sell consolidation at that point, and a lot of studies, a lot of information, guest speakers advocating consolidation. And I have to say, it was a great group of people. Hundreds of volunteer hours went into this, because you figure a few school board members or community members that are spending their volunteer time working on this consolidation, which actually drew it away from my local school board, my local community, Scott's local community, having his input there as well. So, but it was a group that worked together respectfully, which we're
That's a good
pleased
thing
with.
these days.
Yeah.
But I can say that it was very difficult because there were divisions in opinion. And WCSU, our supervisory union, I believe that Act 46 actually created division where there was unity, sadly, which is just the opposite of what consolidation should be. But it really did create enmity where there was just harmony prior to that.
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
That's a sad statement, Carl.
Yeah.
That's sad. Because did the letter end that committee, or
Well,
that was sort of the notice where we're finished, here's our recommendations?
yes, we could not, and please correct me if I get any of this sort of technically wrong, Carl, but we came to the point where we voted on whether it would be advisable to pursue a merger. And we had created the committee. One of the founding principles would be that we would have to have a supermajority of 9 votes. Is that right? 9 votes out of 11 in order to pass to make merger to declare it advisable.
Right.
And this would become yet another bone of contention afterwards. However, when we did vote, the vote was 6-5 in favor of the merger, and then there was a second vote in favor of, to look at the alternative that we had come up with at that point, and the vote there was 5-6.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. However, for those who made an issue out of the supermajority, saying that this wasn't democratic, 50% plus 1 ought to decide the question, the supermajority worked just as it was supposed to, because the vote was taken right after we had received legal advice, which turned out not to be exactly right.
Oh, that's comforting.
So, yeah, regarding the debt issue.
Oh.
And so the votes for merger were based on that incorrect legal advice.
Yeah.
So the supermajority prevented us from pursuing a track that turned out to be poorly founded.
We had a question about the debt a little bit later on, but,
Sure.
but since you brought it up, could you explain to folks why the debt is a big issue? Go ahead, it's all right. We have
Okay.
plenty of time.
Okay, this is for your insomniac viewers.
Yes, well, exactly. I've got my own thing that bugs me. We'll talk about that later.
Oh, okay. Anyway, one of the distinctive features of, at least I think it's pretty distinctive, I don't know that our situation is really reproduced exactly anywhere else in the state. We have one elementary school which has a whole lot of bonded debt that's pretty fresh and that goes out to 2033. It's basically twice its share of the total elementary school.
And that was
debt.
Gotten into after 2015 when Act 46
It was 2013,
Oh,
right
oh,
before
okay.
Act 46.
Okay.
And there's one town that has this big $8 million bond that's paying off. And then there are 2 towns, Worcester and Calais, which put together are the same size as that other town, which I might as well say,
You may
East
just spit it
Montpelier.
right out there.
It's not their fault. I'm not blaming them for
Right.
having a big bond.
Right.
It's just the fact. Whereas Calais and East Montpelier manage their schools, have capital plans, and budget ahead so as not to have to bond. They anticipate their capital expenses. So in a merger, what would
Let
have
me just say, Berlin still has the school bond that we're still paying off, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
yeah.
Ours is sub, I think around a little over 3 million, I think.
Oh, okay,
at
yeah,
this
because I
point,
remember
yeah.
voting for that.
Yes.
A while. But a lot of these things, and for East Montpelier, we had to do some of those repairs just because of the condition of the school, so you're stuck.
Exactly. Yeah. You have no choice.
Yeah.
And just to sort of round out the picture, Middlesex also has a $3.5 million bond.
Hmm.
But Berlin and Middlesex are roughly in proportion. In a merged setting, Berlin comes off a little for the worse, and Middlesex a little for the better.
Yeah.
But East Montpelier comes out a lot for the better,
Oh,
and Calais and Worcester
we're
a
all helping.
lot for the worse.
Right.
So basically, as of next year, East Montpelier still has $7 million to go to pay off its long-term debt. Half of that would essentially shift over to Calais and Worcester
Right. That have
taxpayers
nothing.
who have nothing, right? So because everything is pooled, what happens is that the Calais and Worcester taxpayers become liable to pay off $3.5 million of essentially what would have been the rest of East Montpelier's bond.
Well, I'm sure that's happening around the state and other places.
In other
so
places, in
I've
different
heard, I've
ways.
heard the issue about absorbing others' debts, and I don't think anybody's too happy about it.
Yeah.
Because you've already calculated how much more we're going to pay.
It wasn't
which
my
is-
calculation.
which is
it was
why I
actually-
called you.
Right. It was Lori Bebo.
Oh, Lori, well, she would know for
Yeah,
sure.
and
Yeah.
she's the
Oh.
WCSU treasurer. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Carl sent out a memo, it's to be 7 cents per 100, right?
Mhm.
And it will increase.
Forgive me if this is a
No
dumb
such
question.
thing as a dumb question.
But in this situation, and this kind of goes into the next question, which is about educational governance. If you have worth 3 or 4 this consolidation into one facility, if you end up with an empty facility that still has a bond on it, what happens in that situation?
You still owe the money.
Right. But you
Yeah.
have an empty property that's
Yeah.
not contributing to anything, but you still owe the money on
You
it.
still owe the money. Yeah.
And nobody's thought about, this isn't the time for any suggestions from me, but nobody's thought that, like we do at state government, have market factors, so it's sort of added on. You wouldn't want to add on to East Montpelier the bond that they've voted for, or in Berlin, where they pay an add-on and not share it with the group.
Yeah, that's specifically, well, there's so many good ideas from the
Yeah.
group, so many brilliant,
Right,
thoughtful
right.
ideas,
No.
but they're not legal. And,
Oh.
and that goes for educational governance. When we were discussing alternative models, I mean, some of the best educational supporter minds in central Vermont were there coming up with these great ideas, like the federated model that we came up with. And education law prevents improvement in education
Our law or
because it's
federal
so,
law?
it's state law, yeah.
Which we could change.
Well, yeah.
Just saying.
Yes.
It's in our power to change it if it's really good and better
Yeah,
than
and-
what we have.
And the same thing with the debt issue. There were so many great
Yeah.
ideas, but you have, no, that's not legal, that's not legal, that's not. So, there would be harmony again if some of these great ideas were instituted. We could find a way
It's a
for
matter of
East
intent and
Montpelier,
wanting
East
Yeah.
Montpelier not to drop, 8 cents in their tax rate,
Right.
while Calais and Worcester get nothing to show for it and
And go
Yeah.
up,
get raised.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's continue talking about this, the idea of this financing, specifically the property ownership and
Now I pay
indebtedness.
attention.
Where,
This is my hot button.
so to follow up my first question, under this, if you end up with that empty property that maybe has a bond on it, maybe it doesn't, what happens with that empty property? Who owns it? And what are the options for, can the community in which that empty building lies reinvest that building into some manner of community asset?
Okay, I want to start with a point, and then you can.
No.
You can get
Go
the
for
dollars.
it. Go for it.
So-
I saw a look there, now I'm nervous.
So the
No.
first thing, if there are any folks from Worcester and Doty or from Calais right now watching this, that's the big fear, is that consolidation does not necessarily mean you're closing down schools, according to the law. But the fear is for Calais and for Worcester that their schools will be closed. And financially, if it comes down to that new board, in our case, WCSU case, that forced merged new board, if if they decide that those are closing, they will close. Now, what happens to the building? That can be addressed in the Articles of Agreement, but it's also within the law as well. And specifically, there are a lot of different things that can happen depending on the use of the facility after. And Scott, this is where I want you to come in.
It's actually a really interesting question, because all of the thinking that I've sort of been doing along the lines of what you were just saying, Carl, has to do with the plans that have already been kind of made. The efficiency study, which talked about consolidating all the 6th graders from around the supervisory union into U32, and then closing Calais, and maybe sort of rearranging Doty to be a campus of Rumney. And sending Calais kids to East Montpelier. This was all part of Opportunity 50, as it's called, a certain sinister ring to it. But
sci-fi movie.
Yeah, it's true. From the efficiency study in early 2015, as Act 46 was sort of making its way through the legislative pipeline. But I've never really thought about the possibility of closing one of the buildings that had a bond on it. I guess mainly because the ones with the bond have been more recently renovated and are more. There would be a greater attraction to use them as opposed to, the old workhorse schools that have been investing in their own sort of capital maintenance and replacement out of their current budget, because these schools are smaller, they're older, and even though they have a 75-year capital plan in the case of Calais, that to keep up with all the work that will be necessary over time. The attraction of the shiny and new is hard to beat.
I had understood, I don't know where I got this from, but the suggestion was made that like Berlin would sell the land that the school is on for $1 to the supervisory union, and so they would own our property in Berlin. Now that's where I just, because when I first heard about the consolidation, I thought, well, if they merge and use this school over here, this school, and land could be sold and could be back on the tax rolls, which would help the town, because all we hear about is property taxes are too high. So but now it sounds like the supervisory union gets to say what happens to our land in Berlin. Am I right or wrong? Because I'm going to be, I hope I'm wrong.
Well, no, I think you're right. I think you're right. Am I?
Yeah, I'm not. I guess that one specific
huge.
part of the law is difficult, and it can be addressed in the Articles of Agreement.
We must have paid for that land somewhere along the line.
Well,
the school owns it.
It was actually donated by a family that, in Berlin's case, that specifically said it must be used for educational purposes. So, in Berlin's specific case, and because we're an island, we're 20 minutes away from East Montpelier. We're 25 minutes away from Rumney. So. The chances that their kids will be coming to Berlin are slim, and Berliners who could live near Northfield won't be sent to East Montpelier either. But if the Berlin property was sold, which I don't see that happening, I think the greatest danger for WCSU, for people who appreciate their local community, is for Worcester, Doty to be closed, and Calais to be closed.
Well, that certainly is the center of our town. Without a town center, it's the school.
Right. So our land would still go back to the town, I believe. If it was sold, but I don't see that as a
Because I just thought that was the
possibility.
perfect answer for people talking about property tax. We'll put it back on the rolls and help us reduce the taxes.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Thanks, Carl.
Scott, you said something which I haven't really heard discussed much in these conversations which we've been having, which is after a merger happens, you said something about a plan where you would repurpose one building to be a campus of another school, and the whole point of this bill is supposed to be to save money and make
Yeah.
things
As
like,
he was
you
talking,
know,
I'm
that's
going,
kind of how it
"Cha-ching."
was pitched, right? Like, it's supposed to save money and streamline things and make things easier. But if we're creating sub-satellite campuses of things, which still means keeping the building open and paying people to be in there and sending students there, like, what's the, I don't get it.
Carl has
Cha-ching.
great words for this.
So, and you were going to actually talk about the 5 goals of Act 46 as written in the law. And if you summarize, you say, to cut costs. But that's not specifically one
No.
of the goals. It's to get a value that
Yes.
taxpayers appreciate or basically will support. So it doesn't in the law say it's going to cut cost. And in fact, historically, where this has happened, the state of Maine, it does not cut
Right.
costs. What cuts costs is consolidation of supervisory unions, which is not happening
Yeah, we're not
happening in
doing
Act
that.
46. And
Right.
Yeah.
You know, when they
this
say
was
in the
a-
State House cut costs, what they mean, and I think it's here, is that they cut the amount of increase. You know, so if they're expecting an increase of 20%, then they'll pass a law, and when they say it's going to cut costs, they mean it's only going to go up 10%, but it's going to go up. And I can't see where there's savings here because, well, we can talk about it. Teacher salaries, you have to make them all equal. Transportation, I mean, I don't see
So
where
the
there'll be-
so the
Yeah.
cynical translation of that then is the point of it as written isn't to necessarily lower your taxes, it's just to make you not care as much about paying the taxes that you're paying.
well, as a
luck
board
with that,
member, one of the
especially.
things I do as a board chair specifically, each year you have to get your budget passed.
Right.
And it can be difficult in a small district, small town. All it takes is 2 or 3 people to really lead a charge against a budget.
Burlington ran into that
Yep.
badly
And,
this year with their new campus they
Sure.
wanted
Right.
to do.
What, so with a larger voting block where the majority of the towns may be more likely to vote to support a budget, the budget will more likely
Yeah.
likely pass, which is, I believe, why the Vermont NEA was a pretty strong supporter.
Huh.
When you might think because there was a potential loss of teaching positions, they would be against it, but they were actually a pretty strong supporter.
That first year is going to take a whole lot of educating because, I'm sorry to keep talking about Berlin, but
No,
we're used to a certain number. And then this new budget is going to come in and it's going to be, what, 10 times? I mean, that's going to take a lot of understanding and comparing what we used to pay with what we're getting. Somebody better think of that one and how to explain it to us folks.
I think that may be one of the reasons that Act 46 gets bipartisan support. I think the governor and the Republican side of the aisle probably believe that this will cut educational costs. They'll help have a better student or a lower or a higher student to teacher teacher to student ratio. But again, when I first got on the summer study committee, I Googled school consolidations and the state of Maine came up. And it did a lot of research about
didn't work
how
well
it worked
there.
for them. Their
Yeah.
forced consolidations, it was nothing short of a train wreck for the
Yeah.
state of Maine.
They're
which
trying to
is-
back out of some of those
Yes. A
consolidations
lot of them did.
now.
A lot of
They're
communities
breaking them
did.
up.
Yeah.
And one of the things I heard, through the grapevine, through the community is that Vermont lawmakers said, well, we did it better. The leaders that kind of wrote it, we did it better than the state of Maine did. How so? We made it so communities couldn't back out once they were consolidated.
So you're stuck.
So they fixed the problem that they had.
Excellent. You mentioned the agreement. After the merger, you have to write up
Articles of
articles
agreement.
yes.
Yes.
But I think the State Department of Education wrote up a model. I know. I heard it's not the greatest document in the world, but that's there if towns haven't written. Have we written and taken a shot at writing this?
We have.
Oh, good. Good.
Yes, there's been an Articles of Agreement committee that's been
perfect.
working for a number of weeks, as well as a debt committee that was trying to look at one specific article, the Article 5 on finances. And there's a flurry of meetings early in the year of sort of organizational or informational, or it's very hard to keep them straight. I mean, and I'm in the thick of it. I don't know how citizens are able
That's
to
what I'm worried
process
about,
this.
right.
Yeah.
Because you're going to, what happens is they'll hone in on one thing and they won't see the rest of the picture.
Right.
Yeah. I think I'm way off the question, sorry, but what really killed us in this area is when Barrytown went to vote and they voted no.
Yeah.
And then the state turned around and went, oh, just kidding, you have to merge. And some of us who sort of believe in, I don't know, the Constitution, and a few other documents, we were wondering, well, then why bother voting? Just say, here's what you're going to do and forget it. Because or call it a non-binding resolution, call it something. But if you ask people to come out and vote, and then you say, just kidding, I find that upsetting in this, I don't know, America, United States.
You're not alone.
The Times Argus had an interesting article, and the title was "Tie Goes to Merger," and it was Barry City 3 times voted to merge. Barrytown voted 3 times not to merge.
Right.
So the SBE, State Board of Education, said you need to merge, and the Times Argus article read, vote 2-1, tie goes to merger, which is, that was so disturbing
wrong.
to me. I feel horrible for Barrytown and for our form of government in a
It's like,
sense,
what country
because
are we living in?
when voters clearly come out against something, for them to be ignored. And I'm going to walk on dangerous ground here, but when I was in high school, one of the big mantras was no means no. We heard that as young gentlemen, and in the Me Too movement right now,
No means
I think
no.
we have a Me Too moment for educational governance in Barrytown. No
Good
means
parallel,
no. What
good
message are
example.
you sending to
Yeah.
people?
Yeah,
to
and
young
not
people?
only in Barrytown.
Right.
I mean, in Orwell and Huntington.
They've done this
and many-
elsewhere too?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so
There
when they
are
voted no,
many
they
places
just said, just kidding?
They just said, what your no vote doesn't matter. Your yes vote
Oh my God,
counts,
I'd be
no
furious.
vote. And even, I think Orwell voted no something like 4 times.
Oh my God. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think Barrytown is having another vote, right? I heard they're going to be eventually voting 4 times. So they've done 3 already, and they have 1 more. You know they're going to vote no, I think.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'd be furious.
Well,
I am furious, and it's not even my vote.
what's interesting, last night I was at the Doty, the Worcester school board meeting, and they had voted not to join a lawsuit that is pending against forced mergers.
Right.
Last night, they voted 5-0 not to join the lawsuit, but to appeal the State Board of Education's decision to force the merger. And even one of our colleagues, who is strongly pro-merger, said that voted for the appeal because he said the way the state agency and Board of Education have gone about this is just appalling
Right.
and completely contrary to
Who we are.
who we are
Exactly.
and to what they should be doing.
Yeah, I
under the
just
law.
couldn't believe that. That
Yeah.
was, and because you try to encourage people. We encourage people to vote. It's it's a privilege. You've got to vote, and so you go out and vote only to find out
That it doesn't
count.
Yeah.
The
That's
people that are cynical about voting
Yeah, right,
will
exactly.
have a
Why
very
bother?
strong example of,
Yeah.
of
Yeah, why
why
bother?
they don't bother.
Good point.
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, I'll stop. Go ahead. I feel better now.
Well, that's the point of a conversation.
Yes,
is
right,
it takes its
exactly,
natural
sorry.
course. Let's talk about the committee's community engagement process. When folks were out talking with people and having those conversations, what was some of the general feedback that was received?
Well, it was difficult because the 706B committee did not have a single voice. We had folks that believed different things. We had a very strong contingent of people working on the federated model or an
Which,
alternative.
can I just ask you, what is that, the federated model?
Well, it was I should let you talk about this. It's your.
No, I should maybe let Eric talk about this because actually it was sort of converging on converging towards ideas that that Tom Pelham, who is an alumnus
We know
of the
Tom Pelham in this show.
Yeah, an alumnus of the Calais
Yes.
School Board,
Yeah.
among other things. We kind of looked at it as a hub and spoke kind of
Right.
arrangement,
Right.
in order to incorporate the grassroots aspect of the town school boards into the overall
Right.
unified, or rather, the union. It was a federated union, or as one of our colleagues referred to it, an FU, which I thought was
Bleep.
hilarious, but as opposed to an SU, of
Yeah,
course.
right.
But the idea was actually to take the best of what a merger scenario could offer and preserve the best of what local governance
Right.
can offer, and work the two together in a harmonious way.
So the 6 school boards would be the spokes, and then the hub would be the supervisory union. Is that sort of
the spokes, basically it would be the local boards
Right.
would feed into
Right.
the hub,
Right.
and there would be a kind of shared membership, but also what we were looking at is a transfer of certain authorities,
Oh, right.
so that the central board would be able to do things that a supervisory union board would not be able to do right now. But crucial elements of what the local town school boards do right now would be preserved. And this is, it was heading very much in the direction of Tom's idea of these regional, what I understand his idea to have been, of these regional educational administrative districts, where the idea would be to kind of streamline the administration, streamline the bureaucracy, and let the teaching and the learning happen
Right.
with as little, sort of without the heavy hand of bureaucracy on top of it, as much as possible.
Good.
You know,
Oh. And that was just called federal, just because?
We call it the federated
Oh,
model.
I see. Well, that makes sense.
So,
Got it.
and that's one of the great ideas I was
Yeah.
talking about.
Right.
And when you hit the state
they said
education
no.
laws that hit the
State
hit the rocks.
education laws.
Yeah.
Just
State
focus on
education
that.
laws.
We can't change the feds, but we can change state law.
yeah, that's right, and I think it's necessary.
Yeah, I think so. So I heard about I'm just taking, I heard about a 45-page document that you prepared, and that, so we gave you these questions before, no
I
surprises.
know, surprises, no.
But I heard it's got people's attention. But I heard it was a lot of people, like Carl, they all thought it was wonderful. Some folks were a little,
Thank you.
scared of it, I think, because it would laid it out, didn't it?
Well, I tried to.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
for you.
And it was, I think, I don't know how to describe it. It was sort of a point-by-point look at Act 46, both the findings and the goals in light of our reality, and just pointing out where Act 46 was misfiring in the directions that it was
Right,
going.
right. Is that available anywhere?
I'll be happy to send you a copy.
Oh, I'd love it. I was trying to find it, but I would love to read
yeah.
it. I have no life, but I thought I could read it at night sometime.
Well, once again, I
No,
think
I
you'll
really
find
would
it
like to.
good.
Yeah, if you
I'm
wanna pass
very
it on, that'd be
actually
great.
just very
Okay,
kind.
thanks. Sorry.
Yeah, but it served, even though the people whose opinion I most respect
There you go.
did seem to like it,
Yes.
which pleased me.
He was quoted as saying he liked it. I read that.
And it rattled, I think, others who were less sympathetic to the case that I was making. And what it performed a function that I wasn't really expecting. But I don't know if you know the story, the children's story, Stone Soup.
Oh,
Do you
sure,
remember
I
that?
know
Yeah.
that, yes.
It kind
Yeah.
of served the purpose of
Yeah.
a big, ugly, jagged rock dropped in a pot. And then afterwards, everybody sort of came together.
Right.
And this is part of what's great about the people we work with. And even those who were kind of horrified by what I had written
Right.
came and said, well, if we put this in, or if we put that in, and everybody kind of came and added
Right,
something
right.
to it. And that is how
Good
our
stone
ultimate,
soup.
how our alternate, our Section 9
Right.
alternative governance proposal was
Right.
put together.
Good job.
Yeah.
So I always I joked at some of our meetings that my favorite author is Taylor Caldwell, who I think is the most brilliant author of the 20th century. My second favorite author is
Is
Scott.
Well, you've
So
written a lot of
when I
things.
got the attachments in my emails from Scott, I'd be like, "All right, excellent." And I'd stay up late reading
Yeah,
those.
this was a little easier questions to write for this show, because all I did was Google his name, and I went, well,
Right.
there you go. There are my
And,
questions.
the historical context that he put Act 46 in, and he introduced me to a term, something that the Vermont legislature is familiar with. I wasn't. Advocacy study. So he taught me what an advocacy study was, where you have an idea or philosophy or a plan for your policy, and you hire somebody to do a study that promotes and supports your position.
Yeah.
And
you
Act
go.
46 was built off an advocacy study.
Yeah, a whole bunch, and they're still coming.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can't wait for January.
Really?
Yeah, so since I stole all your questions, just to bring it.
It's
He's so
all right.
patient
It's
with
all
me.
right. I wanted to see, Scott, if you could elaborate on something you said in the video, which is that Act 46 is focused on
Yeah.
administrative management as an end rather than a means to an end. Could you elaborate, please?
Yeah, sure. Consolidation as a policy, as a way of changing governance, is the basic idea is that there are economies of scale to be achieved in administration, in instruction, facilities, that sort of thing. And the logic of consolidation basically takes you down that path, so that you are looking at every issue through the lens of economies of scale and efficiencies, all of which are important to try to achieve, but it's really only a part of one dimension of what, of course, education is all about. And we have serious issues not only in our in our 5 towns, but in our state. And what Act 46 it comes up nose to nose with is the real problem, the population decline, that children are not being born. And in addition to that, people are dying or are becoming sick or addicted in the prime of life. This is, and the children that are being born are coming to our schools, many of them having experienced trauma
Yep, right.
or very serious adversity in their lives. So this is where the problem, it's so much bigger than just looking at spreadsheets and figuring out where we should maximize the number of students in a given classroom for it's sort of it misses the target of what we should really be aiming for. And this is this is sort of what I meant by that. That management is a necessary part, but it's nowhere near
Maybe it
sufficient.
should be about the kids. Just saying.
Well, and this is the thing.
Just a thought.
Well, what we always hear from the pro-merger advocates is, it's for the kids, and it becomes, a kind of, I don't know. To me, it's sort of an empty gesture.
Right.
It's sort of like, a flag pin that you wear while you're actually voting against veterans benefits, or
Right.
something
there you
like
go.
that.
Yeah.
What being really about the kids is about individual
Right.
children and trying to make their educational experience and their overall experience at school as nurturing and as positive and as building of character and humanity as we
Right.
can.
I'm glad you mentioned the trauma. I'm on Prevent Child Abuse Vermont Board of Directors, and you mentioned the opioids. That's an issue. I mean, it's the statistics of child abuse is pretty unnerving, and I think we owe our teachers a debt of gratitude, because they have a different classroom before them than they did when I was going to school. Our biggest thing was sneaking a smoke in the bathroom, and now it's a different kind of smoke and a whole different kind of world we're in. So
This is true.
yeah, and there's going to be a lot of turmoil with the teachers, and interesting.
Well,
but there are.
it's
I'm sorry.
interesting how you pointed out how everything in this is connected, where this is kind of, it's a result of population decline, which is connected to opioid crises, which
Right.
is connected to our current healthcare situation in the state, which
Right.
is connected to workforce development in the state, which
Yeah.
is connected
Yes.
to benefits cliffs issues, which is connected to this and that, and the
Yeah.
knee bone connects to the thigh bone, or whatever it is. It's
Small
not-
state
Absolutely
dilemma.
and that's, I'm hoping that people are seeing this process and seeing this as a big red flag that we need to really look at the root cause of what is setting off all of these other
Right.
issues. What's the catalyst for
Right.
these myriad issues we have?
Yes, and when you do a program on that,
Yeah, we'll be here, right?
I want to be sitting where Gail is.
Well, I always think the legislature, and I don't know how you can do this, but they look at one issue at a time. And so, you will say something, and well, of course you'll agree with that. But you're only looking at the issue, not what you just mentioned, all those things and how they all fit in. And they don't step back and look at Vermont and all of the issues and what would help fix it all.
Yeah.
I mean, they just do one issue at a time, and I think they miss the mark sometimes. But anyway.
Yeah.
I've heard it said that sometimes it's activity in action rather than solutions. So if
There you go.
you're seen to be having activity, it looks like you're doing something anyway, even if
Yeah,
it's
right.
not a solution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Scott, could you go over the focus, what's expected in Act 46, the different what they expect to have happen, equity and quality and those things, and what they want you to achieve from all of this?
Yes. The 5 goals of Act 46,
Right.
and I know with David and Brad, you undoubtedly
Right.
went through them: equity, quality, efficiency, transparency and accountability, and value.
Of course.
These, again,
Are they in the eyes of
cynical.
the beholder, or
yeah,
is it?
oh, most definitely.
Yeah. So
most
it's not really
definitely.
spelled out in the.
They're described. Efficiency is actually described most in most detail, and they, in terms of lowering the ratio of staff to students. So, and by achieving efficiency, by achieving flexibility and in operations, but these words are, unfortunately, they're such buzzwords, and again, there's a kind of emptiness
Right.
to them.
Well, I
that-
thought your interpretation of value before was very interesting, because I'm pretty sure everybody thinks the costs are going down and it's gonna be cheaper. I'm pretty sure that's what we
I
think.
think that's the way. I mean, that's the way it was broadly marketed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes.
That's- Find a time that centralized government grows and costs are lowered for me, and I'd be glad to. I would be glad to agree with that. But again, look at history. The state of Maine did it. If a true study on this would be to look at somebody who did what you're doing and
Right.
find out their result.
right.
The
Yeah.
last thing Vermont wanted to do, I think the folks that pushed Act 46 were to investigate what happened elsewhere where forced consolidation happened.
Well, I said something the other show we did on this. If people see they're getting their value, speaking of value for their money, the kids are excelling, the kids are, the highest going to college rate or going to tech centers or something, and they're content with how their money's been spent, they may not be arguing about how much they're spending. The brood line for this is they're not happy with what their money's producing. And I
Yeah.
think that when you were talking about the core, I'm not sure it is how expensive it is. They don't think they're getting their money's worth.
Yeah. I have a feeling that that's a
Yeah,
big part of it,
I
and the sense that that two categories of expense seem to be growing much more rapidly, sort of ballooning. Administration
Right,
being one,
right.
and special education being the other. We're talking about why special education is sort of booming, but administration is the one that is so hard to control. And administration, what happens when, as Carla was saying, is you centralize the operations, it actually tends to create more bureaucracy and more administration.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah.
Where are we now? We have about five minutes. Or where are we? What's happening with our schools now? Because the deadline's done, right, for submission. And what's next?
Well, from my perspective, we're backed in a corner, and there's definitely a schedule of merger right now. So
Really?
the Secretary of Education put forth their plan. The SBE said you will merge into a consolidated district. So at this point, we still have a team trying to come up with WCSU specific articles of agreement. And I should have had my calendar with me, but it's changing daily.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if the communities within WCSU, as one voting block, from what I understand, approve those articles of agreement prior to January 28th, then WCSU will be forced consolidated under those articles of agreement. If not, if the voters say no to these,
Yeah.
as perhaps a show of resistance to forced merger, or for whatever reason, then we will have the default articles imposed on us,
Yeah,
is my understanding.
I've heard that there's a lot of dissatisfaction with those imposed articles.
Oh yes.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, and that was written by the Department of Ed, correct?
Yes.
Agency of Ed,
Right.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and Carl has referred to this as a railroad job, and I think it's a great description, because we're damned either way.
Right.
If we resist, then we are forced to go to the default articles, which everybody hates. If we go with articles that are moderately more acceptable, then the state gets to say, well, look, they've accepted the forced merger.
Capitulation.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a capitulation. So, but there's also the lawsuit.
Yeah, there's hope.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
two
There's hope in the
lawsuits, right?
courts.
There's one about school choice, and the other one about, is this constitutional in the first place, correct?
Yes, there may be others as well.
Right. I just know of two that are out there, and I don't know if
Yes.
they've been filed yet, but
Right. There's a kind of statewide lawsuit that I think is going to be filed next week.
oh, okay, good.
And then Stowe and Huntington have their own lawsuits
Oh, I have not
specific
heard of
to
them.
their
Yeah,
cases
right.
regarding forced merger.
Right.
As I have
Yeah.
heard,
Well,
as
and this
subject
other one
action.
I know for sure it's been written is about school choice, because a lot of these mergers eliminate school choice, which
Yeah.
is, I think, something the legislature is not unhappy about.
Mm.
That's my take on that. But
Yeah.
anyway, I'm sorry. Just
So is there anything that you would like to see happen in the next few weeks? What's the in your ideal world, like what would you like to see happen?
I'll go first, you go second.
Please.
Well, the first thing, there is legislative action happening. Many members of the Washington County delegation, certainly because of Barrytown, but also because of WCSU's situation, are looking to put forth legislation that will delay the forced merger for a year,
good.
two, rather than rush in and have it be disorganized and not go well, possibly take some time and do it as right as possible. There's also the potential that for WCSU, since we did follow the law, Act 46, under Section 9, you were allowed to come up with an alternative governance structure. We did that.
you did it.
It was denied summarily by the Secretary of Education.
And you felt it met all the criteria
Oh, yeah.
of what you
Yeah.
just listed,
Right.
equity and
Yes. Yes.
So there's also, we're hoping that communities that follow the law still get the tax incentives, which is a long shot, but that bill is.
That I find difficult because you worked really hard, and they said if you don't accept the forced merger, you don't get the incentives. I would think the school, the state would want this to be successful, and I think that money, if you did an alternative, you should get it as well because you want it to be successful.
Right.
You don't want to punish somebody because they thought of
And-
something better.
And punishment is the right word because there is a
Yes.
cost to consolidate, administrative
Of
cost,
course.
just letterhead.
Right.
And so basically that amounts to an unfunded mandate,
Right,
in my
exactly.
view, by.
Signs on the buildings. I mean,
Yeah.
there's one thing, you
Yep.
can,
That's right.
million things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So.
I'm worried about the teachers. I don't know if you've looked at the, I'm not going to talk about salaries. They're going to have to be equitable. So if one school pays more than the other,
Yeah,
so please
luckily-
finish up about what the.
Right. Teacher salaries were good.
Oh,
Because
okay.
we're already coordinating.
Oh,
those
perfect. I didn't
in
know
our
that.
in
Oh,
our
good.
supervisory
Okay.
union.
So and then we have just a few minutes if you wanted to talk about what you'd like to see next. And
I'd like to see the lawsuit succeed.
excellent. There you go.
Concise.
Yeah, that's it.
That's what I've asked Santa
Yeah,
for
because I know
Christmas.
somebody said that this is the first time the Board of Ed has really forced discussions that should have happened years ago about how can we work more efficiently, effectively, and they said that they really should accept all alternatives. That was tough to say. All alternatives because it'll work in your area, and you know your area, and it'll work best. So let you do it. That would be a good thing, wouldn't it? There you go.
Yeah, it would be.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Scott. It was a pleasure having you on. Thanks for tuning in. It's our show. There's more coming on Act 46, so stay tuned. And we'll see you next week. In the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.